Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to this terrific webinar on bringing farmers to the table, agriculture, climate, economy, and equity. We're delighted to have you join us. I am Lynn Scarlett, the Chief External Affairs Officer at the Nature Conservancy. For those of you who don't know the Conservancy, we are one of the world's largest conservation organizations. We are delighted to be co-sponsoring this event with the European Union. As we move through the event, I do want to let you know that there will be an opportunity for audience participation and questions and answers after our panel. But we want to begin with a welcome from Commissioner Stella Kyriakides. She is Commissioner for Health and Food Safety with the European Commission. So let's have that welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, Europe's Green Deal is an opportunity to transform our economic model to improve the health and well-being of our citizens and protect our planet. We want Europe to become the world's first climate-neutral continent by 2050, built on a fair and equal society and green economic growth. This cannot be achieved without shifting our food systems onto a sustainable path. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to rethink our status quo and adapt to a new reality. It has reinforced the importance of sustainable food systems from production and processing through to supply and use. And it has highlighted the strong links that exist between our health and ecosystems. Resilient food systems are vital for food security and an equitable society and economy. The EU's Farm to Fork strategy, adopted last May as part of the European Green Deal, sets out a clear direction of travel, with concrete targets to transform the EU food system by 2030. We will take action to reduce the use and risk of pesticides by 50%, reduce nutrient losses by at least 50%, and reduce the use of fertilizers by 20%. We aim to reduce sales of antimicrobials in farming and aquaculture by 50% and increase the amount of agricultural land under organic farming in the EU to 25%. The Farm to Fork strategy will reduce the environmental and climate footprint of the EU food system and create a food environment that makes the healthy and sustainable choice the easy choice for consumers. New streams of funding and market opportunities will support primary producers, helping them to implement sustainable practices. This vision is not only European, it is global. Through Farm to Fork, we want to promote a global transition to sustainable food systems. This includes ambitious trade agreements and forging green alliances to respond to distinct challenges in different parts of the world. We want to bring our trading partners with us in this transition. We are now beginning to work in order to establish a regulatory framework for sustainable food systems, which, combined with labeling and other incentives, can help to raise sustainability standards worldwide. It is essential we work together on this. We cannot do this alone. If we don't act together, we will all suffer the consequences of the destruction of our planet. With our planet, our food systems are also under pressure. The stakes are high. All actors and partners need to come together to achieve a transition to more sustainable food systems. We are ready to lead this transformation for people, the planet, and our long-term prosperity. Thank you.
What a tremendous global vision, and I think here in the United States, many points in common, many issues and challenges we share, and many ambitions where opportunities to move forward together might present themselves. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is Michael Curtis. Michael is Deputy Head of Delegation of the European Union to the United States. He's had a long career with the European Union in various institutions, working on foreign policy, external relations, trade, development, humanitarian issues, and many other things. He served in the team of the EU's foreign policy chief, advising on a number of key foreign policy issues for the past 5 years, including on transatlantic relations. And earlier, from 2004 to 2008, he worked as the EU Humanitarian Affairs Counselor to the United Nations and as press spokesperson in various additional positions with the European Union. So, Michael, I'm delighted to have you join us and look forward to your remarks.
Thank you, Lynn. Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the EU delegation to the US, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this exciting and timely event. I'd like to thank our speakers and panelists for taking the time to be with us, but also you, the viewers. Today's world faces a painful dichotomy. Against a backdrop of diminishing natural resources and vanishing biodiversity, a growing population demands more food and better food. Worldwide, obesity is dramatically increasing, having tripled since 1975. Yet, still we waste each year a staggering 1.3 billion tons of food, while all the while millions of citizens, even those in industrialized nations, go hungry every day. The COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare how vulnerable our food systems are and how biodiversity loss can directly translate into a public health emergency. The planet is changing in front of our eyes. For some, climate change is not a distant threat, but a shocking reality today. Just last week, the US Commodity Futures Trading Commission issued a daunting report highlighting how extreme weather causes swings in agricultural commodity prices, and climate-spurred market volatility could affect financial markets with dire consequences for the whole global financial system. Without drastic changes to our food system and to the common misperception that natural resources and food sources are inexhaustible, these trends will increase, driving our societies towards a frightening future. Unfortunately, this will further exacerbate inequalities that still persist everywhere. As mentioned by Commissioner Kyriakides, natural emergencies are a painful reminder of our vulnerability and the need for a new, healthier, more equitable, and more sustainable approach to food systems. Rethinking our entire food chain, making it more resilient and future-proof, will need to go hand in hand with creating business opportunities and spurring innovation and growth. But how do we translate the value of sustainability in the agriculture sector and the bioeconomy in general into business models spurring growth and jobs? Already today, we are experiencing enormous advances in technology and knowledge that can lead to exciting new approaches to managing resources and farm-to-fork systems. This is what our panelists will be sharing with us today. On top of that, a new trend is emerging which can turn land use into a solution to the climate emergency. It is called carbon farming. Land has an incredible potential when it comes to carbon sequestration capacity, so-called carbon sinks. Indeed, the land use sector can compensate for some of the emissions in our hard to decarbonize economic sectors while providing for an additional source of revenue to farmers. As more and more companies pledge to reach net zero emissions, an increasing number of businesses will need carbon offsets to realize these pledges, creating market pull. New green business models can emerge for farmers around regenerative agriculture and for foresters around restoration and management of forests, reforestation and supply of biomass for long-lasting bio-based products. Innovation will also be a strong driver of this transformation, with the use of digital tools and satellites, as well as innovative financing models. Regulators can support this trend, setting up a credible system that contains good data and methods to measure the carbon sequestration capacity. Public authorities can mobilize public and private support and financing. The European Commission is committed to supporting the transition to healthy and sustainable food systems in the European Union that provide an important contribution to climate action. The adoption of the farm-to-fork strategy marks an important step towards this objective. Besides the actions listed by the Commissioner, such as a reduction in the use and risk of pesticides and antimicrobials, let me also highlight a number of other avenues of our work. Firstly, the Commission will work on preventing food waste and food fraud and work on improvement in animal welfare. Secondly, we will improve healthier diets by encouraging food reformulation, improving information to consumers with front-of-pack nutrition labeling and sustainable food labeling. This will create a food culture that makes healthy and environmentally sustainable choices the easy and affordable choices. And thirdly, 40% of the EU budget dedicated to support the EU agricultural sector will contribute to climate action. This equals to $24 billion a year. This money can be used by local authorities to set up result-based incentives to carbon sequestration, as well as additional push for carbon farming. All of this work is guided by an overarching objective of ensuring equity and leaving no one behind in the transition. The EU will be making sure that our citizens have access to sufficient, safe, nutritious, and sustainable food. If I may quote former US President Theodore Roosevelt, who more than 100 years ago famously wrote, "The farmer is a good farmer who, having enabled the land to support himself and to provide for the education of his children, leaves it to them a little better than he found it himself. I believe the same thing of a nation." Indeed, we can all take part in this effort, as the transition to sustainable food system requires a collective approach involving public and private actors across the food chain. It also requires collaboration across the globe. As Commissioner Kyriakides has pleaded, we are all in this together. And with the joint efforts of the European Union and the United States, we will already be a long way ahead. It is now my pleasure to pass the floor to Congresswoman Shelley Pingree for her opening remarks. Congresswoman Pingree is a longtime organic farmer, a member of both the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture and the House Agriculture Committee, and a co-author of many important farm bills. Congresswoman, thank you. The floor is yours.
I'm Congresswoman Shelley Pingree. Thank you to the EU Policy and Outreach Partnership and to the Nature Conservancy for having me today to discuss sustainable agriculture. The coronavirus and climate change are both global problems that require global solutions. The coronavirus pandemic has exposed the importance of a resilient food system. Since March, we've given extra thought to where our food comes from, how important the supply chain is to what ends up on our tables, and the link between our health, the health of our environment, and the food we eat. There's a growing consensus that farmers play an integral role in the climate change solution. Last month, more than 2,000 farmers sent a letter to Congress asking us to provide farmers and ranchers with the tools they need to become better stewards and implement solutions to the climate crisis. Nationwide, farmers are already seeing the effects of climate change. The EU Farm to Fork strategy has many similar goals to my work in Congress. Together, we see sustainable food systems as an economic opportunity for farmers across the world. Investments in soil health, organic agriculture, renewable energy, seed diversity, and reducing food waste. All these options offer agricultural producers much needed stability and will help them weather the unpredictable future. This past February, I introduced the Agriculture Resilience Act, a comprehensive bill with the goal of net zero emissions in U.S. agriculture by 2040. This legislation builds on policy solutions that are science-based, farmer-driven, flexible, and voluntary. It expands on existing USDA tools and harmonizes federal policies, like providing crop insurance premium discounts for producers who use climate-friendly practices. This legislation was the model for the agriculture section of the House's first ever comprehensive report on the climate crisis. Policymakers around the world see farmers and ranchers as a part of the climate solution. I'm an original co-sponsor of the bipartisan Growing Climate Solutions Act, introduced by Representative Spanberger, a Democrat, and Bacon, a Republican. This bill would create a program at USDA to certify third-party technical assistance and verification providers, which would lay the groundwork and reduce barriers to entry for farmers who want to diversify their agricultural income and earn money for implementing climate-friendly practices. There's much work ahead, and certainly ample opportunity for the EU delegation to collaborate with federal policymakers in the US. As a longtime member of the House Appropriations Committee, I know Congress must work to set climate-focused funding priorities in our annual appropriations bills. Plus, we have the 2023 Farm Bill to look forward to, which will offer a significant opportunity to define the future of federal agricultural policy. There's a role for lawmakers on both sides of the Atlantic to play in promoting sustainable agricultural practices. I look forward to joining you as we work towards a food system that is sustainable, net zero, and regenerative. Thank you.
Now we're ready for our panel. Again, for those who have just joined, I am Lynn Scarlett, Chief External Affairs Officer of the Nature Conservancy. I'd like to thank Michael Curtis and Representative Pingree for their opening comments. I want to welcome our panel discussion, but I want to first offer a little additional context, building on what you heard from Congressman Pingree and from Michael Curtis and from Commissioner Kyriakides. With agricultural systems accounting for nearly 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, the success of climate action policies depends on more environmentally, socially, and economically sustainable agriculture and food supply chains. As you've heard from several of the preceding speakers, the pandemic has reinforced our recognition of the inextricable links between healthy people, healthy societies, a healthy planet, and flourishing economies, and the role of a robust and resilient food system in contributing to this vision of sustainability. The pandemic plays out within an even broader and deeper global malaise, one in which climate change has reached crisis proportions with vast and varied impacts already evident, and potentially catastrophic impacts for some communities anticipated. Nature itself is at risk with alarming levels of deforestation, accelerating biodiversity losses, chronic droughts, and extreme flooding, a warming ocean, and more. Flooding, for example, that itself affects and impacts agriculture. Yet there are hopeful possibilities for addressing climate change, restoring ecosystems, and improving water quality, while also meeting the health, welfare, food security, and livelihood needs of an increasing global population. Those possibilities depend upon evolving agricultural practices and food systems in ways that bring economic opportunity, help address climate change, and enhance equity and access to food production and food supplies. Both the European Union and the United States have underway innovations to harness these opportunities in the agricultural sector, to be a part of the climate solution, to reduce environmental footprints of agriculture, and to enhance equity and access to food supplies. The European Union has articulated a comprehensive farm-to-fork strategy. You heard a little bit about that. In the U.S., as you've heard from Congressman Pingree, we have a bipartisan bill, the Growing Climate Solutions Act, that has galvanized discussions around the role of agriculture in climate solutions. These discussions and engagements by farmers in regenerative farming practices are underway. You heard Congressman Pingree refer to some 2,000 people from the farming sector who have asked the Congress to work with them and advance their role in presenting climate solutions. Today's panel brings together 3 panelists who will explore these opportunities for evolving agricultural practices and food systems in ways that help deliver a healthy planet, people, societies, and economies, and address climate change. We'll have an interactive conversation for about 35 minutes or so, after which we will turn to questions from the audience participants. If you have a question, please put it into the chat box. Please do so as the panel conversation proceeds, and we'll turn to your questions at the end of our discussion. So I'd like now quickly to introduce our panelists. Their biographies are included in the event materials. Our panelists include Dr. Christine Negra. She is Senior Advisor for Climate and Agriculture. She has over 25 years of experience as an extension agency, a researcher, a program director, collaborating with development, research, and finance organizations to bring science into policies and markets. Dr. Yichao Rui is a soil scientist with the Rodale Institute. He is a soil scientist with a focus on improving soil health and environmental sustainability through regenerative practices. Dr. Rui oversees soil health research at the Institute, supporting all short and long-term projects. He also leads outreach initiatives to educate the public and farmers on the benefits of improving soil health. And then we have Greg Veers of Durham Wheat, who is Durham Wheat Procurement Manager with Barilla America. He grew up on a grain and livestock farm near Maxwell in central Iowa. Together with his brother and father, he still operates their family farm in grain and livestock in Iowa. For over 2 decades, Mr. Veers has been the purchasing manager for U.S. and Canadian durum wheat and semolina for Barilla America, Inc. So let's start the panel. And Christine, I'd like to open with you. With your role at the UN Foundation on Climate and Agriculture, what do you see as the potential for the agricultural sector to contribute to climate solutions? And what do you see as the barriers to realizing those solutions?
Great. Thanks so much, Lynn, and also thanks to the event organizers for the opportunity to contribute today. Yes, you're starting with the right question for sure. You know, we know from the IPCC, and there's a growing body of research, real-world experimentation, that there is really tremendous potential for climate solutions in the agriculture sector. And that takes 2 major forms, of course. It's enhanced resilience to climate impacts, as well as the possibility of mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, all of that is happening, as the previous speakers alluded to, within the context of transitioning to more sustainable food systems. So one thing that's really important, and I think everyone knows, but we always have to remind ourselves, is that food and agriculture systems vary quite a lot, country to country and region to region. But there are some general approaches to climate smart agriculture that are relevant kind of almost anywhere in different forms. And one of those that I always like to emphasize is diversification. And that can mean a lot of things, but it's a good general strategy in agriculture. So in general, by growing different kinds of farm products, growers can improve the land and water use efficiency on their operations. Often they can reduce pest and disease pressure over time. And if done strategically and informed by regionally relevant information, they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So just as one example, many farmers around the world have been adopting over years agroforestry as a way to diversify their production. And through that, they increase resilience and build carbon stocks to varying degrees in different places. Another piece of that puzzle of diversification is that growers who produce more than just 1 or 2 commodity crops, whether that's a large operation in the US or it's a very small operation in Eastern Africa, you really can gain resilience, and that's both to unexpected weather conditions, which will affect different crops differently, but also to volatile market prices that one of the speakers just mentioned. Of course, in the US, it's really important to talk about reduced tillage. It's a well-known strategy in the US. It's been widely adopted. And when the right tillage strategy for the operation is applied, over time, again, agricultural soils can build organic matter and resist erosion, provide more plant available water. There's a lot of really important co-benefits that come along with that. So again, no-till and strip-till have been widely adopted. Many farmers have experimented with that, and we're learning more and more about the effect on carbon stocks. Just one last example of some of the potential is this idea of risk management. So this is a little bit different, right? So in many ways, it's what farming is all about. So as agriculture steps up to be part of the climate solution, there's a lot of avenues to explore, both in actually minimizing climate-related risks, so various practices and modifications in the way operations are run that can reduce risks and vulnerability to extreme events and supply chain disruptions, et cetera. But for where there's a reducible risk, there's a lot of ways to do risk sharing. We think about insurance, but there's a lot of different ways we can continue to innovate. So we recognize that that everyone needs a high functioning sustainable food system, and it's not just the burden of individual growers to bear. We need a community-wide solution. So you did ask about overcoming barriers, and I think what I would say is that we need to combine this sort of growing awareness and passion in some quarters for climate smart and regenerative approaches with the necessary investments in research and testing. We've made some and we need more. So our current production systems and the research and testing enterprises that have come along with them did not evolve with this regenerative approach right at the center. But if we have the right mix of science, innovation, market governance, and other pieces, we can figure out the combination of strategies that can deliver both material and monetary benefits in specific farming systems.
Thanks, Christine. Greg, as a farmer and as a long-time participant in the agricultural sector, when you engage in these discussions about agriculture, about its potential as a climate solution, about its potential, for example, in enhancing regenerative agriculture, building on Christine's comments, what do you see as the barriers for fulfilling the farm sector's potential to contribute to climate solutions and some of these practices? And then looking at the reverse side of the question, why is the agriculture sector increasingly so engaged in its role as part of climate solutions?
Hi, first of all, I'd like to thank you for inviting Barilla to participate in this very important discussion. Barilla is an Italian food family company. We have a particular precise mission. Our mission is to bring food to the world that is good for the people, meaning nutritionally good and balanced, but also good for the planet, which is sourced from responsible supply chains. Our mission demands that we have a strong relationship with farmers regarding our durum wheat supply chain, which is essential to make pasta. To date, more than 9,000 farmers worldwide are involved in sustainable agricultural products. In particular, for Italy, we have developed a handbook for sustainable cultivation of quality durum wheat, integrated with a decision support system called granoduro.net. Thanks to a series of sensors and on-site inspections, granoduro.net provides a constant monitoring of the durum wheat crop. The information is uploaded from the sensors to a dedicated website, allowing the farmers to make informed, timely decisions regarding the use of fertilizer and the control of diseases and insect pests. From the promising results that we are seeing in terms of CO2 emissions reductions, we can tell that precision agriculture has a huge potential in addressing climate change issues. For regions outside of Italy, we have developed handbooks for sustainable cultivation of durum wheat, which are tailored to specific regions of the durum wheat production. These handbooks are made available to farmers in regions in which we operate. On the reverse side, what farmers really need first is an open and transparent approach in order to get them to participate towards innovative solutions and technology. Second, solutions need to combine environmental sustainability with economic sustainability. As an example, Barilla's Sustainable Durum Wheat project allows farmers to have and preserve the environment and safeguard or even improve their income at the same time. Again, looking at the reverse side of this question, why is agriculture sector increasingly engaged in its role as part of the climate solutions? Today's farmers know and realize that they have a relevant impact on the climate. They can see that climate change is affecting them as weather becomes increasingly unpredictable and sometimes extreme. This negative consequence can cause reduced yields and lower farm income. It is in the best interest of the farmer to take a leading role in finding climate solutions. Many farmers have already adopted sustainable farming practices, and from our experience, we can tell that given the right conditions, they're willing to continually improve their operations. In addition, we are seeing that consumers are increasingly interested in making sustainable food choices. Farmers and food processors are therefore incentivized to work together, finding innovative solutions to make food more sustainable.
Thank you, Greg. Dr. Rui, the Nature Conservancy and many others have described the poor health of many soils around the globe. And can you talk a little bit about that degradation and its causes, but then also its remedies? How can we improve soil health, and how does that relate to the issue that we're talking about in terms of contributing to climate solutions?
Hi, Lynn. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be part of this exciting conversation. Thank you very much. And for those you don't know about Rhoda Institute, Rhoda Institute is located in East Pennsylvania in the United States, and it was established in 1947 and widely recognized as the birthplace of organic agriculture in the United States. So I work as a soil scientist at Rhoda Institute. So in terms of soil degradation, I guess I have a lot to say. I was born in China, and I was trained and received a PhD degree in soil science in Australia. And now I work in the United States. So I've seen a lot of soils. Especially I witnessed some drastic changes in soil when I grew up in China in the 80s and 90s. So I think it's now, it's been widely recognized that the global agricultural soils have experienced substantial degradation in the last century. Soil organic matter, or soil organic carbon level, is central to the quality of soil and the function it provides. But most agricultural soils in the world have lost about 30 to 50% organic carbon, leading to poor soil structure, declining soil fertility, water quality and biodiversity, and increased greenhouse gas emissions. So this is largely attributed to unsustainable management practices, including monocrop, for example, just growing corn or soybean, over application of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and intensive and frequent use of tillage. So these practices have substantial negative impacts on the physical, chemical, and biological properties of soil. But by making the switch to regenerative agriculture, we can restore soil organic matter and soil health, therefore improve the well-being of the planet. So this can be achieved through implementing regenerative practices. For example, move from monocrop to diverse crop rotation, eliminate synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, and build soil organic matter for soil fertility, integrate crop with livestock, and use cover crops instead of leaving the soil bare ground during the winter. And here at Rhoda Institute, we have developed innovative systems such as the cover crop-based organic no-till systems that can keep regenerating soil health while maintaining crop yields. And through soil organic carbon sequestration, as a result of the regenerative agriculture, we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate climate change.
Thanks, Dr. Rui. We've heard from all three panelists about the innovations that are underway to improve soil health, to advance farming sustainability, and including from Greg what the private sector is doing, what the particular companies doing. We have in our audience a lot of people that are part of our government in the United States. And so I'd love to hear from any of you, how can governments motivate and facilitate these innovations. Any of you have any thoughts on this? What is the role, for example, of the Congress or the EU and its endeavors? Any thoughts emerging on the focus in particular of regenerative agriculture, and are there government policies, actions that could help to incentivize or stimulate that? And please, anybody weigh in on that.
Lynn, I can just jump in first, although I'm really eager to hear what the colleagues on the panel have to say. You know, I think one of the things I think it is important that we wouldn't actually be having this conversation today if the agriculture community and governments around the world weren't already beginning that process of innovation, right? We're on a path. We may want it to go a little faster. We may need to figure out whether we're all going in the same direction. We're already doing it. So I think we just need to kind of have that in frame, that we're not just sitting here doing nothing. We're already in motion. You know, in Europe, obviously several initiatives are pulling all kinds of policy and finance levers to shift towards more sustainable food production and consumption patterns. And the keynote speaker spoke to that very well. In the US, the discussions around the Growing Climate Solutions Act are really creating the terrain around which to explore the technical and market potential of climate mitigation in agriculture. We have some answers, we don't have them all. I did call out one aspect of the farm to fork strategy, which I don't know well, but I think just understanding the sort of lead story, that I really appreciate the emphasis on supporting food producers, right, to make that shift to sustainable practices and technologies, and rewarding them when they do so. Because I think, you know, if we don't have that in view, we're not going to see the large scale changes and adoption that we need. So farm decision making, it's really responsive to the policy and value chain incentives and constraints. So while we're really good, I think, at having farm level initiatives, whether that's new technologies or specific farm level incentives, they're really important. But without that larger context shift, it's difficult to really shift that farm level decision-making process about adopting or not adopting improved practices. So technological innovation, absolutely, but also institutional and market evolution as a real linchpin if we're serious about food system transformation. And, you know, and a key piece of that, of course, is making sure that as we do roll out advanced data-driven farm management tools, which in the EU and the US are so important, make sure we have equitable access to those things. And I think as these, you asked about what's the role of government, I think it's to work with private sector partners to make sure that we're aware of the full opportunity for climate smart agriculture, and that innovation is reaching all farmers and the whole farmland base.
Thanks, Christine. Greg, what are your thoughts? You talked a lot about what your company is doing on its own and self-initiated, but what do you see as you embark on or continue that effort? What do you see as a possible role for government to stimulate, enhance, further those efforts?
Yeah, first of all, I'd say that universities and government agencies need to promote the adoption of precision farming technologies. I know that not all regions in the world have access to some of the same precision farming technology that we have in North America, but there are huge gains to be had through precision farming. You know, technology allows you to grid sample fields, for instance. You can go in and apply fertilizer based off of the fertility rate map. I do that on our farm here in Iowa, and we've been no-tilling for almost 20 years now. So we were an early adopter of that methodology. The second thing is, I think the governments and universities need to support all initiatives that bring together the entire supply chain, not just agriculture. Agriculture plays one of the biggest parts. I think it's estimated we did a life cycle assessment of durum wheat production, and about 51% of the greenhouse gas emissions are generated in production agriculture. So, but we need we need an integrated approach that goes from the agricultural community to consumers. As we are seeking to do with our sustainable agricultural projects in Barilla. Research institutions can also play a huge role. Also, we always work with local universities and research centers to foster agricultural innovation. In the United States, for example, we cooperate with North Dakota State University. In Canada, we cooperate with Agri-Foods Canada. So that's how I see that governments can play a more important role to foster adoption of more sustainable farming practices by farmers.
Thanks, Greg. We heard Congressman Pingree talk about the Growing Climate Solutions Act, an act introduced on a bipartisan basis in the U.S. Senate, and it's intended to facilitate participation of the ag sector in carbon sequestration, both through agriculture and forestry, and including through facilitating participation in carbon markets. Dr. Rui, as a scientist, can you talk a little bit more about what you see as the potential for participation by the agricultural sector in carbon markets? And you might describe a little bit what those even are. And what's the status of soil science relating to carbon sequestration and measuring and ensuring that there's integrity of those carbon credits and so forth?
Sure. So as I said, most cropping soils around the world have lost about 30 to 50% of soil organic carbon. So the carbon sequestration potential of the agricultural sector is huge. So I believe the development of any carbon market should always involve the agricultural sector. And in terms of the soil science status as related to carbon sequestration, actually, there has been a lot of substantial advancement of knowledge in the last 10 years, in the last decade, which is very exciting. For example, the formation of soil organic matter or soil organic carbon. Historically, it was believed that soil organic matter formation or carbon sequestration was a result of recalcitrant plant carbon. For example, lignin. Those recalcitrant plant carbon, from plants, they are very hard to decompose, so they can stay in the soil for a longer time and contribute to carbon sequestration. But now, more and more conceptual and empirical evidence start to show that the majority of soil carbon actually is directly from the microbial residues or microbial necromass. So this fundamentally changed our knowledge about carbon sequestration. Therefore, to promote soil carbon sequestration, we should actually try to promote microbial biomass production and protection. And we can actually achieve that by regenerative practices.
Following up a little bit on that, back to you, Dr. Rui. Is our knowledge sufficient to measure the gains in carbon through those practices such that one could generate carbon credits and have them be put forth in a carbon market? What's your sense of the state of play, state of knowledge, and our ability to ensure that that such soil practices yield carbon credits of integrity and quality?
Yes, that's a great question. I think there's growing consensus that now we should standardize our measure, the metric for carbon. For example, historically, a lot of different measures were used for, measuring carbon. For example, the lost on ignition method for the organic matter content or the full combustion way. So now it's increasingly being recognized that we should standardize that globally. So we should try to use the most accurate way, the full combustion method, to measure soil carbon. And also to accurately assess the carbon stock, we should not just look at the topsoil, the first 15 centimeter or first 30 centimeter. We should look down deeper in the soil, because there are some studies show that with some practices, you can accumulate carbon in the topsoil, but lose carbon in the deep soil. So we should look the soil carbon stock comprehensively in a holistic way to document the change over time under these different practices.
Thank you. Christine, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. And then I want to turn to the other side of the equation here. We're talking about solutions, but no doubt some of the motivation for all of this in the agricultural sector comes from the impacts that farmers are seeing from climate change. But first, back to you on the question of carbon credits and soil health and the farming sector and its participation in those potential markets.
Yeah, and Dr. Rui spoke to it extremely well. And I think that maybe almost making the meaning out of that in the market context is it depends a little bit on a couple of things. It depends on the scale. And it depends on the buyer and what their expectations are. So if a buyer wants to buy credits directly from a discrete farm, it can be, there's some real cost to doing the direct measurements. If there are available calibrated models that allow the change in practices to be translated into reliable, accurate estimates, that can work. In some parts of the world that works, in other parts it doesn't work as well, or different farming systems. So we're on that path, but we're not fully there yet for everywhere that we need to seize that part of the climate solution. There are ways that you can structure carbon markets and agreements around what the transaction really involves. What are you buying? What kind of buffer is involved for non-permanence risk or inaccurate estimates? So there's both the specific measurement components, but there's also the design of these things so that we make sure that there's a lot of transparency and that we really understand what level of uncertainty we're dealing with, and we're just honest about it, and we understand that we're going to be on an evolving train. Our measurement will get better. It's modest, it's moderate, it's not fully developed, but that doesn't mean we can't take action already.
Thank you. And I want to remind our audience, in a few minutes we'll turn to you. So if you have questions, please do put them in the chat, and we'll turn to those questions soon. But I want to go to Greg and turn to the question of the challenges that farmers are facing that they see as a consequence of the effects of the changing climate. I know that we had enormous flooding from high intensity rainfall events in the last year or so that resulted in millions of acres being essentially pulled out of production. But I wonder if you would talk a little bit about that and how that may be having an effect on the farming community thinking about addressing climate change, sending that letter of 2,000 participants to the Congress, et cetera.
I think, let's see, am I muted? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I think that really farmers are first line workers, if you want to equate it to the COVID-19 pandemic. Farmers probably see the effects of climate change sooner and to a larger effect than other people in general. So I think that farmers have a benefit of being on board with adopting production practices that are more sustainable. The more sustainable production practices help reduce the carbon footprint. So I think farmers are going to be some of the first to adopt, and already have been some of the first to adopt new technologies and new practices. For a lot of practices, really more sustainable farming practices kind of equates to maybe a higher income or more profitability. The use of precision agriculture just allows farmers to put on no more fertilizer than they need, no more seed than they need. They place those nutrients and seed in the right place. And so, and I will say that North American farmers are quick adopters of new technology. They're very, very progressive. So they have already come a long ways down this path. to become more sustainable. I want to give credit where credit's due. I guess that's my answer to you.
Thanks, Greg. And I want to pull the conversation back to the EU and ask everyone, anyone to chime in. We heard some shared themes from the opening comments of Michael Curtis, from the comment of the commissioner, and then from our panelists' comments. How can the EU and the US work together, and in what ways, on these shared solutions? What are some opportunities for that? And anybody chime in. Maybe Christine, you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I think there's dozens of different ways. I think just to pick up on an earlier comment about standardization, the EU has actually stepped forward and invested some real time and energy bringing multiple sectors together through the EU taxonomy and through a range of other policy initiatives that speak, as I said, into the finance space as well as the policy space. And I think what they're trying to do, if I understand it correctly, is get common, quote, green definitions. And so whether it's trying to look at the agricultural finance arrangements where the clarion call is financiers should be screening their investments and positively directing their investments to more sustainable, climate smart agriculture. How do they know what that looks like? And so I think that kind of work that I've looked at a bit in the EU context offers, a nice basis. It's different, like I said at the beginning, different places are different and agricultural systems are different, but there are some commonalities, and where we can learn from the technical work, speaking into the finance space, for example, that's one great opportunity, and I bet there are a lot more.
Dr. Rui, coming from the vantage point of a scientist, you've been in Australia and looked at soils, you've been in China and looked at soils, you're in the US looking at soils, we've heard about Europe, and no doubt you have some insights there too. So from a research standpoint and soil health standpoint, what do you see as the opportunities, and what's going on now in terms of collaboration and coordination between Europe, the European Union, and the US?
Hi, I've not only been to United States, Australia, and China, I've also been to 10 European countries. So I've seen some European soils as well. I think the collaboration between the United States and European countries can be improved. There's room for improvement for that. I can see that because the size of the United States, so a lot of the researchers here, they only interact within the community in the United States, which I think is not enough, is not going to be helpful for the entire human beings. I would like to see more interactions between the researchers in the United States and those from European countries, especially. I would like to see the researchers, scientists in the United States to be more proactive, to reach out to our European, counterparts. That's my personal,
Great, thank you, Dr. Rui. I want to now turn to our participants, the audience, open for questions, and we do have some that have come into the chat. So I'm going to throw one out, and the question is, what are any of the panelists' thoughts on combining crop farms with solar farms? Anyone have any knowledge about or thoughts about that? Greg, maybe as someone in the ag sector, you can speak to the feasibility of that or the potential of that.
That question was for me. This is Greg.
Yes.
Okay. I think it's fine to combine the two as long as you're not taking high quality, good productive soil out of production. For instance, in Iowa, we have a huge number of wind turbines. Iowa, I think, is second in wind generation behind North Dakota. So that's it's not solar, but it's a renewable energy. And so again, I think it's fine to combine the two as long as you're not taking good productive land out of the system.
Great, thanks, Greg. I have another question, a very different one. Let's see, I've got to find out where it went. Well, if I can recall it, the questioner says they've talked with farmers in Kansas and indicated that the way crop insurance programs work, it makes it difficult for farmers to engage in regenerative agriculture. And so the question is, what needs to be done differently with crop insurance in order to more incentivize or enable or enhance regenerative agriculture practices? And maybe, Greg, you have some insights on that too, but certainly Christine or Yi Chao chime in as well if you have some thoughts. But Greg.
Yeah, I'm not really that well versed in crop insurance, but I will say that I just think that because we're looking at agricultural endeavors much differently now because of climate change, the whole system probably needs to be revamped. We need to look at it from the beginning again, and so that would mean that insurance companies would have to reformulate how they price out their crop insurance, and would just have to start all over with sustainability in mind and some of these sustainability projects in mind. Just create a new system because risks would be different under this new system, and so I think insurance companies would probably have to relook at how their programs work.
Lynn,
Thanks, Greg.
Lynn,
Yeah,
I
go
could
ahead.
just with an example from another side of the world. Some years ago, I had a look at the New Zealand model, and they do something very interesting with their insurance. I don't know the ins and the outs, but if I understood correctly, they had some tiers that they used when there was a risk that farmers faced that was basically unmitigatable. And apologize for the light flashing. We seem to be having some excitement here. So if it was an unmitigatable risk, and a farmer experienced a loss, they got a full compensation under the terms. If it was a mitigatable loss and they didn't do the mitigation, they got less. And I think just in concept, there's something really interesting there to Greg's point about revamping, that it's a covenant, it's a collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and the farmer to mitigate risks wherever you can, and where they can't be mitigated, share the risks as best you can.
Thanks, Christine. I have a question from the audience asking, do we have a reliable estimate of how much of our agricultural lands around the world are actually being worked in a regenerative manner? And thinking both of crop and grasslands. Any estimate, any insights on that?
I think less than 5%. The percent should be around something between 1 to 5%.
So we have a long way to go. It looks
Yes.
like we've got some practices underway. We've heard Greg talk about them in his direct work, both of you, Christine, and really talking about the potential. But it sounds like we have a lot of room for further exploration of regenerative ag. So perhaps that links to one of the other questions, which is, we've talked about government, we've talked about the private sector. What role can philanthropic funders play in accelerating the transition to moving ag towards better land practices? What are the gaps that government and private sector aren't filling that might be appropriate for the philanthropic sector to step in? Any thoughts on that from any of you?
I'll just offer a couple thoughts. One, I think there are tremendous range depending on the mandate of the particular philanthropy and what it's looking to do, and there's a huge role there. One of the new directions, because I think we are kind of occasionally tipping our toe into the finance side, is in this new arena, relatively new arena of blended finance and agriculture. So that's a new space. It can take a lot of forms, but it's basically saying that we're going to distribute the risk across a particular investment. So if we're talking about innovation, we're talking about sharing the risk with farmers of adopting new technologies, new practices. How do we do that? Who's financing that? When and where can philanthropies be part of that? Take on some additional risk, some of that repayment risk, along with maybe commercial lenders. And again, a lot of forms this could take. But I think that's something, we don't know a lot yet about how that's going to work in agriculture, but it's a new direction that can be quite significant.
Great. It reminds me of some things the Nature Conservancy is actually doing in the forestry sector. We have something called the Family Forest Carbon Project or program. And one of the challenges that many private forest landowners own 5,000 acres or less, and their upfront costs of changing practices or making some of the investments that would enable them to engage in carbon markets are not insignificant. And so in partnership with some philanthropists, and including a partnership we have actually with Amazon, they're funding or investing in that Family Forest Carbon Project to help support, both technologically but also with some financial support, those upfront costs. Then the farmers will be, or the foresters in that case, will be positioned to move forward. So maybe there are similar things in the farm sector as well along those lines. Talking still about carbon, but then I want to move to the consumer side of the equation. Someone has asked a question about that, but I want to pursue the carbon piece a little bit more. In part, the Growing Climate Solutions focuses on carbon and carbon credits. What about the accounting part of created carbon credits? How would actors in the U.S., for example, do that? How do you do things like avoid double counting and so forth? And does anybody have any comments? And maybe Dr. Rui, you have some comments initially, since you really are looking at the science of soil health and enhancing carbon in soils. But then please, anyone else chime in as well.
Yeah, so the accounting of the carbon stock in the soil, as I said, there's increasing consensus on this, and there's an increasing demand for a more improved, accounting system for that. But that's probably what I know about. I would like to hear more from the other panelists.
Thoughts from our other panelists? Christine, yes.
I have to give a shout out to TNC and their collaborators for the workshop that they had just last week that explored this issue in really excellent detail. And what I really appreciate about that workshop is it brought together some of the really best known scientists working in that area, as well as some of the innovators, some of the folks who are looking to get some of these carbon markets, evolving them and to get them taken up, and participation by a broader range of producers in the US and beyond. And I think there were a few ringing messages that I heard coming out of that. One is that we're still reliant on direct measurement of soil carbon at whatever time interval that is, but that is still a critical piece of the puzzle. There may be some solutions that are coming down the track that will mature, that will allow us to use a combination of remotely sensed information, calibrated models, and baseline maps to start to take down that expectation. But the key barrier with direct measurement is you got to go out in the field, you got to take the sample back to lab, and you got to analyze it, and it's expensive. So that is really the big hurdle everyone's trying to leap over. But we talked about this a little earlier. There are some ways that we can both be doing some pilot work, be doing some more standardized measurement, be doing better data sharing, so that we make really good use of the data that we have sitting in different pockets, so that we can do a better job of calibrating calibrating the model so that we can have less expensive estimates, so that when people buy a carbon credit, more of that profit goes back to the farmer so that they feel the benefit and they want to keep doing it. And I think that's really the heart of the matter.
Great, thanks, Christine. We haven't talked about the consumer, the person that eats the food that's generated by agriculture. And we do have a question here, and I'm reminded of the title of this session, Bringing Farmers to the Table, and that probably has multiple meanings, bringing them to the table in climate solutions. But in the EU endeavor, it really is a holistic picture from on the farm to the plate. And so one of the questioners said, what do the panelists think about the role of consumer demand for purchasing foods that come from regenerative, climate-smart agriculture? Is there that demand? Is it spontaneously emerging? Is there funding, for example, needed for outreach and expansion of education around food and healthy food choices? Any thoughts on that? Greg, from you in the farm sector, or Christine, you may have some thoughts on that as well. But let me start with Greg.
I don't have, much to say about that topic, I guess.
Are you seeing interest in the consumer or the consumption sector, the buyer sector, for climate smart agriculture? Or
no, yes, yeah. I'm glad you rephrased the question. Yes, we're seeing a lot of consumer interest in how their food is produced, where their food comes from. We get many emails monthly, and consumers are really becoming engaged in the food production. So we're seeing a lot of interest there. Yes.
Christine, any thoughts?
Well, it's very much kind of outside my area of expertise, but I will say a number of years ago, I was involved in the International Year of Pulse Crops, which is the UN Food and Agriculture Organization declared kind of every year we have a kind of special focus. And so I did dive in a little bit, and, you started to see chickpea chips and all kinds of other types of new products that were on the shelf. And so I'm always very curious about how that shifts, what changes what's on our shelf, because certainly bringing more of these legumes, increasing the consumer demand for those helps with crop rotation, because it gives a better market for having some of those nitrogen fixing crops in amongst the cereal grains, which is really positive in a lot of ways. But I don't know much about how that demand is generated. So when somebody figures it out, and probably somebody always has, I just don't happen to know them, but it's sort of like, feels like this magic switch gets flipped on, but it has a real effect on what happens in the field.
Great, thanks, Christine.
I think I can jump in and comment on that as well.
Good.
For example, the USDA organic certification, the USDA organic label came onto the shelf in the year 2000, right? It took a few decades, 1 or 2 decades, for the consumer to realize, oh, that's there, and we need to buy that for our kids. And it takes some time for consumer to get familiar with that. And right now, the term regenerative agriculture is becoming more and more popular. So the consumer will start to look for products from that. So that will take some time. So now we have actually established a new certification system, the Regenerative Organic Certification, the ROC, which is a new global certification system. And the new products under this certification has just been released last month. So in the future, I believe there will be more these kind of products, agricultural products under this certification or other regenerative agriculture certification coming to our lives.
Great. We have just a few more minutes, and I do want to give each of you a chance to make a short wrap-up comment. As you do so, we didn't get to quite all the questions, so I'm just going to let you know some of the remaining questions, and maybe you can build in your responses in your wrap-up. But question about the compatibility of precision farming with regenerative agriculture, question along those lines. Question about what regenerative practices protect microbiomes of the soil. I think, Dr. Rui, you spoke a little bit to that. But please feel free to make your final comments, take whatever shape they want, but I wanted you to know that there are those questions still lurking in the background. So Christine, let's start with you.
Well, at the risk of not responding to those last questions you threw in, there's something that I really wanted to add to the frame to today's discussion, which, that larger global context. We've been primarily talking about EU and US, which are really big, important players in the global ag and food system. But we also live in a globalized food system. And next about a year from now, there's going to be the UN Food Systems Summit. And so that's been described as a summit that's intended to catalyze a new vision for how food arrives on our plate. So it's very much, this food system transformation frame. And it's meant to be a solution summit. So the idea is to really dig into the unique mix of strategies that are being tested in different countries for climate resilient, climate smart food systems. And so I think just for those who don't play in the United Nations space all the time, and I don't myself, that's not my only hat that I wear. Each year, the Secretary General picks just one vital issue to highlight through a summit. And it really is such a big moment to galvanize political attention from heads of state and everyone else. So in terms of changing the dialogue, really leveraging the technical, collaborative, deliberative mechanisms of the UN, which are, really are quite impressive and can cover a lot of terrain, to really demonstrate the centrality of sustainable agriculture and food systems. And certainly COVID has brought that to the fore, and really move the global conversation towards meaningful action. So I know we've talked about some really technical issues, but I think it's really important to focus on global agreements, global convergence, global knowledge sharing, and the UN really offers that capacity. And the Food Systems Summit next year is really gonna be the engine that drives some of that work.
Great, thank you. Greg, some wrap-up comments before we end the panel, and then we will have a short interview or discussion with Representative Curtis. So, Greg.
Yeah, the question about can you combine regenerative ag and precision farming? I think you can. Precision farming is more exact. You're not, as I said earlier, you're using less commercial fertilizers, only putting on what the plant needs. Less seed, you're only using what seed is needed. You're minimizing the inputs, trying to maximize the output, because the output or the production is a big part of sustainability. But I think you can combine the two. Maximizing production, regenerative is tied to soil health and digging deeper into the soil, so to speak. No pun intended. But you're just dissecting the soil, and you're doing more work at a microbial level in regenerative agriculture. But I think you can combine the two to some degree, because I think that technology in precision ag would also lend itself quite well to regenerative ag. Just some comments as we finish up here. I just want everyone to know that since 2010, Barilla has reduced the CO2 emissions by 30%. We started working on that. That's company-wide for all of our operations. Water consumption, we've reduced the water consumption by 21% since 2010. So I just wanted to throw some of that out. Packaging, for instance, 99.7% of our product packaging is designed for recycling. And if people want more information on Barilla, they can go to the website www.barillagroup.com. We're very transparent, and we'd like to hear from people.
Thank you, Greg. And I see that Representative Curtis has joined us. So, Dr. Rui, if you could just give very quick closing remarks so that I can turn to Representative Curtis and have a conversation with him.
Sure. So to grow and protect healthy soil microbes, that question is very interesting. I would ask all the participants, what would you do to grow and raise healthy kids, healthy children? We want to provide them with a healthy home, nice structure of home. And we want to provide them with healthy food and healthy family chemistry, right? That's exactly what we want to do to grow the healthy soil microbes. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to our panelists. And if you could all go on mute now, and it's my great pleasure now to turn to Representative John Curtis. And Representative Curtis, if you could unmute yourself, I do want to introduce you. John Curtis represents Utah's 3rd Congressional District. He serves on the House Natural Resources and Foreign Affairs Committees. After being elected to the Congress in 2017, he sponsored 12 bills in his first year in office. A busy year, that sounds like. 4 of those passed through the House and 3 were signed into law. The POPI Study Act to combat the opioid crisis, the Public-Private Partnership Advisory Council to end Human Trafficking Act, and the Small Business ACE Act. Prior to coming to Washington, Representative Curtis was the 45th mayor of Provo City, where he served 2 terms. He was known for his personal approach to city government, his outreach to residents, and had a very popular, apparently, blog. During his terms in office, the city of Provo was ranked #1 in the nation for business and careers by Forbes, as well as #1 for well-being by Gallup. So love to welcome Representative Curtis, and it does look like you need to be unmuted, Representative Curtis.
Lynn, he's actually just a few minutes out. Maybe we could take one more question from the audience before turning to him.
Okay, all right, very good. I see him on my screen, but not here yet. Okay, well then, Dr. Rui, I'd like to go back to you because I did ask you to make your final comments very short. So maybe you want to expound upon them a little bit more. And I loved your analogy of the soils and families, and that they both need the same things, but want to see if you have additional final closing thoughts.
Sure. Thank you for the additional time. So what I was trying to say is that to grow healthy soil microbes, we want to give them a nice physical environment, a good home. So no earthquakes, right? So undisturbed home. So the microbes can live there in the nice pore structures. And also nice chemistry. Most of the agricultural soils are over fertilized. There was just too much, nitrogen, phosphorus, and other, fertilizer in there. So the chemistry is not good for soil microbes. We want a balanced chemistry for the microbes, and also healthy food, healthy diet for the microbes. So microbes like nice, quantity and quality of organic input as their food to produce more biomass, therefore can sequester more carbon in the soil. So that's how we can grow and protect soil microbes, to give them a good home, nice structure, soil structure, a nice balanced soil chemistry, and a good amount of high quality organic input, such as compost or animal-based organic input. Those are the things the microbes like, and they will flourish. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Rui. Looks like we're still waiting for Representative Curtis. He's almost here, I'm told. But let me then go back to all the panelists. And we talked a lot about the science, that is the potential for soil health. We've talked about the fact that there's 1 to 5% of farms around the world that are actually engaging in regenerative practices. So there's a long way to go. But earlier on in the conversation, I did ask about barriers for growing climate solutions, that is for engaging the farm sector, barriers for implementing some of these practices. We did hear that there may be some upfront costs, and therefore blended finance might be a partial remedy to those challenges. But I want to go back to that question, because it's all well and good to have great ideas and good science, but in the end, how do we get this done on the ground? How do we advance these practices, whether in the EU, whether in the US, whether around the globe? So any other comments from any of the panelists on further probing those barriers or how to overcome them?
I'll venture just a thought, which is that I think, you know, everyone talks about work that happens in silos, and that's just maybe an artifact of human endeavor. But if you're sitting on a farm, managing a farm, you're not looking at, well, you may be looking at actual silos, but you're not just looking at the technology. You're not just looking at your soil test. You're not just looking at the markets. You're not just looking at your financing, et cetera. It's the regulatory environment. That when you're at the farm level, the decisions you make are incredibly complex and really dynamic, and often made in a context of increasingly, you know, it's difficult to see what the future is bringing in a climate change context. So I think, as for people who work in agricultural finance, who work in agricultural policy, who work in climate policy, who work in conservation policy, who are all have their eyes on farming systems, really important to just flip the lens, have a look at what it looks like if you're actually one of those land managers. Understand what the real opportunities are and what the real constraints are, and think holistically. So trying to kind of funnel in a technological solution or a finance solution in isolation will work some places, but it probably won't have broad reach. And I think that's really what we're looking for here.
Great, thanks, Christine. And I want to go back to Greg. Greg, you've been at this for 20 years or something to that effect. What prompted you to move this direction? How is what you and what Barilla is doing in this regard influencing, for example, other farmers? And what more needs to be done so that you're not part of the 1% or the 5%, but part of the 20% who are engaging in these kinds of forward-looking practices?
Well, we started no-till, you know, I think it was probably about 20 years ago. That's not an exact number. You lose track of time after a while, but we just looked at all of our input costs, the cost of equipment. You add everything up, and it just made sense to give this a try. When you switch over to no-till, it takes a little bit of time to reap the rewards, because it is a change in how the soil is managed, and I think it takes a while for the soil to get rebalanced. So once we pass that point, we're raising quite good yields, I think, and it just seems to make managerial sense, and most years it seems to make financial sense, just because you have some smaller input costs. So the soil in Iowa is, most of you know, is pretty heavy soil, and so you have to have really good tile in your ground to allow that soil to drain. Otherwise, sometimes your soil needs to be tilled to dry out in order for you to plant your crops in the springtime. But in our area, there are not a lot of people practicing no-till. But but I know in the area where we buy a lot of our durum wheat in the Northern Plains, there is a lot of no-till practice. And
Greg, I'm gonna ask if we could just wrap up there, because I
Sure.
see that Representative Curtis has joined us. So welcome, Representative Curtis, and if you could put yourself off mute. Very good. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lynn, Scarlett, introduce myself with the Nature Conservancy. I'm going to reintroduce the Congressman now that he is with us. He's Utah's 3rd Congressional District Representative, serving on the House Natural Resources and Foreign Affairs Committees. He has been very active right from when he came to the Congress in 2017, sponsored 12 bills. 4 of those passed through the House, 3 were signed into law. Congratulations on that leadership, Representative Curtis. Prior to coming to Washington, Representative Curtis was the 45th mayor of Provo City, where he served 2 terms. During those 2 terms in office, I was very interested to see that the city of Provo ranked #1 in the nation for business and careers by Forbes, and #1 for well-being by Gallup. So congratulations on those achievements during your tenure there, Congressman.
Thank you. The only thing worse than having to listen to my introduction once is having to listen to it twice.
Well, we enjoyed that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And we've been having a good long conversation on the Growing Climate Solutions Act that was introduced on the Hill. We've been talking about regenerative agriculture, the role of farmers in actually contributing to climate solutions. Sometimes at the Nature Conservancy, we refer to the role of farms as and farmers as the hidden solution in plain sight. I would love to hear your thoughts on this forward motion of the ag sector, both in sustainability and in climate solutions, what you hear from constituents from the farm sector, and where do you see this momentum going in the Congress?
Excellent. Thank you. And once again, please forgive me for being late to join you. I have always felt that Utah's agricultural community, and I'll expand it beyond that, I just know Utah's really well, the agricultural community are among some of the best environmentalists anywhere in the world. They don't necessarily realize they are, and they don't really necessarily use the same terminology that you might be used to. But these are people who care deeply about the land, and who would do anything possible to make sure that future generations have this beautiful land that they've had, and that those that came before them had. And they're very interested in protecting and preserving. And they may, like I say, they may use a different language, but I actually think they're some of the best environmentalists you'll find anywhere. I've become increasingly concerned and aware that one of their largest impediments to being good stewards over the land is financial. These are people, for the most part, who struggle from season to season, who struggle with weather and other issues. And sometimes we see them, when they do give up, they sell the farm, and we build condos or other things that are not as good for the land as their use. And I feel just really strongly that as we talk about helping them in their environmental stewardship, we need to talk about the overall economic health of agriculture. And why is it that I can go to the store and buy a dozen eggs for the same price my mother could buy those eggs for, right, roughly, or a milk and some of these other commodities? And what can we do to make them more healthy? And I think that's one of the reasons the Growing Climate Solutions Act is very, very important in Washington, D.C. It is a small piece of bringing some economic relief to them for their efforts. And I think that's just critically important. And I think we want to engage this sector who control our earth in such a high level. And one of the ways we need to engage them is helping them be more profitable and recognizing the value of what they do. and how important it is, and just how difficult it is, the road ahead of them.
Congressman, what are you seeing in terms of the traction that ideas like those embodied in the growing Climate Solutions Act contain? I'm certainly seeing some momentum, and 2,000 farmers or farm groups actually sent the Congress letters saying we want to participate in these solutions. But what's your read of the Congress and the prospects for congressional support for some of these opportunities?
I'm really optimistic, and let me tell you why. So much of the dialogue dealing with the climate is on the two extreme ends, right? And on the one end, we want to destroy the economy, we want to take away life as we know it. And on the other end, there's this complete denial, right, that there's a problem. And it's solutions like this that go, to me, smoothly down the middle, right, into this area where we don't have to deal with extremisms. And we should be able to support this on the right and on the left. And I'm really an advocate for finding those solutions that go down the middle, and they're not extreme on either end. And I actually think our best hope for solving this is, well, let's put it this way. It's impossible to solve this if we're on one side of this equation. You're not going to solve this unless you involve both sides, right, of this. And so we've got to strive for these bipartisan solutions, these win-wins. It's not a winner take all. I get everything I want, you get nothing you want. But and to me, this Growing Climate Solutions Act is a really good example of the type of legislation we need to be crafting here. It's bills like this where I can go out and find Democratic co-sponsors and find other colleagues who will hop onto this. And so I personally am very committed and hope that there is some momentum coming from these types of bills.
That's encouraging. So we have just a little time left. I want to ask you, what else should the Congress be doing, or could the Congress be doing? There's potential, as you noted, in the Growing Climate Solutions Act. Certainly the Congress, of course, periodically puts forth a farm bill, and increasingly that bill is extraordinarily important in driving investments in conservation and kind of win-win-win, good for economy, good for farmers, good for people, good for environment. But where do you see some of those down the middle opportunities for bipartisan solutions that are beneficial to the agricultural sector, to the environment, to people, to the planet?
Well, I'll come back to kind of what I started with, and that is we have got to find ways for our agricultural community to be profitable and to be successful, or we're not going to see the next generation, and certainly not the next generation following up, and their land will be sold. And so to me, mission number one is how do we help them build a financial foundation that will allow them then to do some of these environmental things that we would like them to do. I'll tell you, innovation is just a hallmark of my district and of our country. And there's nobody who are better innovators than our agricultural community. But we've got to untie, right, their financial burden so they can innovate. And I think if we can do that, we'll see innovation in both production and conservation that will move us into warp speed on some of these issues.
So one final question to wrap up. As you know, the European Union has helped to sponsor this dialogue and to enhance dialogue between the U.S. and Europe on agriculture and the future of agriculture. What do you see as ways the U.S. can work with our counterparts across the ocean in Europe to advance some of these innovative solutions and some of the innovation you talked about?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because if I'm honest, I have to admit the European Union has led out and we have not here in the United States. And so I applaud our neighbors across the ocean, right, who are leaders. And I think one of the things that you can do is just to be patient with us, right, and to realize that we are a little bit slower, but we're there, right, and we want to be there. not to give up on us, and to reach out with those innovations that can help us be successful. This dual accomplishment, right, which is increase profitability and be better environmentalists and conserve resources better. Water is a really good example, right? That's a win-win, right? If we can get the same production with less water, everybody wins, and we increase the profitability. So I would say to my European friends, be patient with us and come hold our hand through some of these things.
Thank you very much, Congressman. That is ending us on a hopeful note. I really appreciate your joining me for this conversation and us for this dialogue. I'm going to wrap up by noting to everybody that the next step in these conversations, I want to invite you to a virtual roundtable on results-based carbon farming initiatives that the European Commission will hold next week, September 23rd and 24th, between 9:30 and noon Central Time, I think that is. And the roundtable will bring together experts in the implementation and assessment of climate mitigation actions in agriculture, including experts on agricultural soil research and other matters. So again, thank you very much, Congressman. Thanks to our audience, and above all, big thank you to our panelists. Fantastic discussion. So good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks very much.